If there's one locomotive I have been searching for, and particularly as of late, it is the 440 American by Bachmann. This locomotive really had an effect on my childhood when I first saw it in several of the train sets as a kid. Unfortunately, I just never ended up winding up with one because of how hard they were to come by. It's one of those weird things you have to remember back in the pre-internet era where these sort of items wouldn't just be available at the click of a mouse. You had to literally find them in store, and that was a challenge, despite the fact that these were available in toy stores back in the day. To say that this early pancake drive that we are looking at right now for these locomotives was horrific was an understatement. Essentially, these locomotives never ran correctly when they were new, running very rough, jerking all over the place, and as they aged, well, they just got even worse. The biggest flaw this drive system had that caused the most issues was the fact that it was not all-wheel pickup. All the power was taken through on the rear tender, one truck for the positive, the other truck for the negative. The front truck did, however, provide a negative ground for the front headlight, but that was it. The rest of it actually came from the back. Needless to say, this meant if the locomotive went over any weak points in the track, it would jerk, stutter, and basically become hell on earth. As for these particular engines we've been looking at right now, this particular pancake model, etc., I never actually got them to run because the motor, because of the pickup, who knows. All I know is that I've gotten so fed up with trying to fix these engines that I've pretty much given up and will not be including them in my Bachmann documentary, as it's just not worth going through all the hell to make these things cooperate. Luckily, Bachmann was the type of company that didn't remain stagnant, and it did at least make an attempt to upgrade its products, unlike lifelike products at the time. It reissued the 440 American sometime in the mid to late 90s with a slightly updated drivetrain. And please note my choice of words. I said slightly. The locomotive is still driven by its tender with the motor mounted inside and once again lacks all-wheel pickup. The motor has been upgraded from the pancake design, but it's still a three-polar, not a very well-designed motor, but I guess a slight upgrade from the original pancake design. The locomotive, however, retains the same pickup system used in the pancake era, which further aggravates the situation with the cheap motor and the annoyingly cheap drive system. And needless to say, this upgrade wasn't for free. As we can see by this 2003 Walters reference guide, the locomotive's price had skyrocketed all the way up till $70. Essentially, Bachmann didn't really fix the problem and again decided to jack up the price noticeably. And the way the locomotive ran wasn't anything to write home to mom about either. It jerks its way along on the tracks, shaking back and forth when put on high throttle settings, and finding every possible chance to stall, much like its predecessor. As for the locomotive's ability to crawl, forget about it. The engine was lucky to move at all at low throttle settings, often needing a helping hand just to keep going. Luckily, needless to say, times they were changing in model railroading, and DCC readiness out of the box was now a requirement, and so Bachmann decided to go back to the drawing board and re-engineer this model. And that's the subject of this review, as we finally have now finished all the segueing. Over here we have one of those models. This is in a WAANR paint scheme. Apparently the locomotive was known as the Texas. It again features the updated drive system, which now puts the motor's drive completely in the locomotive itself, leaving the tender available to actually mount a DCC decoder inside. I've heard a lot about how this drivetrain was supposed to drastically enhance this locomotive's performance, so I'm expecting big things. Anyway, let's get her out of the box and see what she has to offer. As I begin to decocoon this locomotive, I'm greeted by very bright and vibrant colors. All the gold detailing is there. Again, the locomotive is already starting to seduce me. Right up until the point where that little smokestack assembly fell off. Luckily, this is not a big deal to reattach. It simply plugs back into position. But again, that's not a good sign for things to come. Taking the locomotive out of the cocoon itself, I quickly noticed that it was basically lacking of any weight at all. It had no weight to it whatsoever and actually felt even lighter than its predecessor. I also noted the wire connecting the tender to the locomotive. This is to provide all-wheel pickup for the locomotive for the first time. However, there was another oversight that I did notice. And here it is. As we see, the middle wheels are in fact have traction tires on it, not a good sign. And the rear tender is still utilizing axle pickups. Again, with the just wheel wiper dragging across the axles. Probably one of the most inefficient, if not the most inefficient ways of picking up electricity for a model train locomotive. You may have noticed the locomotive we were just looking at is different from the first one, and that's correct, as I bought two of these models to give a thorough review and to make sure there were no mishaps. The model I chose, in addition to the Texas locomotive, it was this one here. It's in a Pennsylvania Railroad paint scheme, number 566. As you can see, it's sort of the same old, except this one has a different smokestack on it, which is correct for this particular variation of the design. I note with this engine, much like the other one, that most of the detailing is all plastic and very cheaply placed in. There are some enhancements. Again, the cab has been upgraded to make it look a little bit more realistic. There's been some tweaks to the actual coal tender itself. The original one that was made from Bachmann had some sort of box with metal gates on the side of it to help latch down toolboxes, apparently. That's not here. Apparently that was not realistic for it. Other than that, though, the locomotive essentially is as it was from the previous tooling, with the exception of a few of the little tweaks in the plastic detailing. But again, these do little to add weight, and once again, this one, like its sister locomotive that I acquired, has pretty much no weight to it whatsoever. We also get the usual literature as well as the warranty statement. This is the decoder I'm going to be installing on this locomotive. It's a chip style decoder slash board style decoders are also called. I believe this one is. It was installed on a locomotive I purchased to install DCC and sound in. So needless to say, this decoder wasn't necessary and was simply put into storage in that plastic box you just saw. The first step with this project is getting it apart, but before we go that far, I'm going to of course study the manual and give us a chance to look and see how this is put together. As we can see again, the tender is where the DCC equipment is located. There is a dummy plug inside. To get the tender apart, we're going to need to remove a few screws. We also get a shot of the insides of the locomotive itself. I'm not going to take this apart since it's still under warranty, but what we can see is that the motor has been apparently upgraded. What I'm told is that this is a coreless motor, although I'm not sure if that's actually the case or not. We'll see more on that later on. To get the tender off, much like in the past, we remove the two screws underneath the tender itself, right by the trucks. I also decided to disconnect the plug that provides electric current from the locomotive to the tender itself. I did this by using a very fine screwdriver to gently pull it out, moving one side out at a time. Do not pull on the wire itself to pull the plug out, as you risk damaging the plug itself. With the screws successfully removed, we gently pull up on the tender top to remove it, and we are immediately greeted by the dummy plug. To remove this, we carefully pull it straight up. There's no concern here as long as you're not planning to reuse it about the pins bending, but my advice is not to push things anyway, as you can still damage the socket. Next, we'll take our decoder and simply place it in position as such, right in place on the 8 pins. Line it up carefully and apply gentle pressure once we're sure we have all the plugs correctly aligned to press it into position. Again, the plug will hold itself in place. The decoder is successfully installed. We simply place the tender top back in place and reinstall the screws. Once I finished reassembling the tender and reconnected the wire to the locomotive, I then placed the locomotive on my program track and programmed it for a address of 2, as the engine does not have a road number. With that, we're now good to test it out. Let's see how she does. Oops.
Not a very promising start. Yeah, that is jerky as hell. Give it a little running time on the middle line.
As we can see, the test is already off to a very bad start. Despite more or less clean tracks, the locomotive is finding every possible chance to stall.
Stalled. I mean, seriously? It's stalled? Oh, wait a minute, there it goes. That's weird. Oh my god, this thing's a piece of junk.
Well, sort of.
This is completely and totally unacceptable. I mean, come on. Seriously, this is all you got to show for yourself? It can run by itself. Look at that. And the engine installs.
As we can see, the problem appears to be with the electrical pickups on the locomotive, which are beyond appalling. What's even more appalling is how little weight there is on this locomotive. It's so limited that it actually tends to jump the track when it jerks to a stop, causing me to have to constantly walk over and actually put it back on the tracks. By this point, I began to wonder if this was just a quality control issue with this particular locomotive or some kind of manufacturing defect, so I pulled out my other 440 American that I'd also bought around the same time as the particular unit we've been watching, this one done in the Pennsylvania Railroad paint scheme. Unfortunately, things wouldn't improve much, if at all.
This thing is so light it won't even stay on the track, it just jumps all over the place.
We also see, despite the fact that this locomotive is equipped with all-wheel pickup, it is still managing to cut out on all of the switch points.
Yeah, it's doing the same nonsense that the other one was doing. It'll move and then it stops, means it stops, means it stops. Let's see if we get this thing running out. Hopefully running will help this thing out a bit. That looks a lot better now than what the other one was doing. It's miles better, in fact. See what it makes it through here. I'm going to keep the throttle low setting. I'm going to keep it on 56. It's right now set for. Now it's just barely moving. Well, now I'm going to throttle it up. It's very jerky, and each time it jerks worse still. It's so light that it actually jumps the track. And it's just finding every chance to cut out and stall. Be able to actually make it through the tunnel. I'm really starting to get fed up with this thing. There it goes again, it's stalled. Now it's inside, oh there it is right there on the side, again by the S-curve. Let me get back over there and try to make this work here. This is just ridiculous. Oh, I'm utterly appalled. It's off the track already, give me a break. There's every chance this thing has it.
Wondering if this was a problem with the track not being energized, I decided to push a lit coach along the section and see if it would draw power and light itself up.
It has power in there. Let's get power in there.
But as we can see, it was not a power problem.
So I don't know where that thing... It's not picking up anything there. Now it jerks, then it doesn't go, then it goes, then it doesn't go, then it goes, then it doesn't go. Now it's working, but for how long? And there it goes again.
Just to make sure it wasn't a power problem on this section of the layout either, I decided to go over the track with an alcohol wipe.
And again, it stalls that down there. I don't know why.
With yet more hesitation and failures of installing out of the locomotive, I decided to go over the section by my tunnel area there, that S-curve, with an alcohol wipe, just to confirm that the dirty track was not the issue.
Oh, it's a crap. I'm ready to take this thing and throw it against the wall. I really am. This is just such garbage. Now these tracks are clean. There's no reason for this to be stalling yet. No reason for this whatsoever. Completely appalling. Yep, same problem. No difference. Just the pickups are just crap.
And I do concur with myself. It is in fact the pickups, not my tracks, causing the problem. Now, just to make absolutely sure the problem had nothing to do with my layout, but was entirely the fault of these two brand new Bachmann locomotives, I decided to run a DCC and sound equipped locomotive through this section. Please note this engine does not have keep alive.
Let you run it. There it is. No hesitation. Oh, my railing is hanging off by a thread. I didn't like what I just saw there. Let's try that again. Let's go backwards through it slowly. No problems at all. Okay, folks, I'm back on this again. I thought that was pretty much going to be the end of this review for this engine because I had so much trouble with it. I'd already written a pretty negative review on this because of all the problems I've had with Bachmann as of late. Anyway, a couple of days later, I found myself on the internet browsing around, just trying to see what the deal is with these engines, and finding out that a lot of people actually liked it. And here we have the ERS 566 coming up right now. And I couldn't get over why they weren't having the problems I had. And as it turns out, all of those engines were equipped with a steam system on it, with the sound system on it. So anyway, I read through the reviews, and there was one gentleman that actually had this version, like I have right here, 566. And how he fixed his problem was quite interesting. He put two weights in the tender on the back, which is where the pickups are again on this engine. And by doing that, it somehow or other made it work. And I'm like, this is crazy. But anyway, I grabbed two of these sort of weight sections I bought. I don't know if I have one I can show you what they look like. No, I don't have one handy. Anyway, they're these two sort of weight blocks I've purchased from a supplier. I went ahead and put those inside the tender. I'm not even going to show you how I did that because it's so sketch. So sketch, in fact, that I would probably get kicked out of the AV club if I were still a member. But anyway, yeah, I went ahead and put those two in the tender in a very sketch manner, and as you can see, hopefully this won't make a liar out of me, it is now running consistently and at a good speed too. So apparently the problem was solved by simply putting weights in it. Now that said, this is still a very jerky, messy locomotive to run. It still finds all the weak points and stalls occasionally, but now it's at least usable. I don't have to worry about it getting stuck underneath the trestle, for example. I will go over here just to show you I'm running at a moderately slow speed. Also note the headlight works. I did that by flipping the decoder around. As it turns out, I had it in backwards. It's been a while since I did one of these. And there it is now. See, it comes out into the S-curve that was stalling on before. It goes right through, no problem at all. Absolutely no issues whatsoever. So now I have to I'm happy that this is working, but now I'm basically caught with an unusual prospect of having to redo my last part of my review, which is what I'm going to do at this point. Now, one of the reasons why I bought the Pennsylvania Railroad version of this engine is that I wanted to run my Liberty Bell Special, which is a train you folks have probably seen quite a bit on the holidays, especially 4th of July, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that one out and hook it up to her and give this engine a really appropriate train to halt. Finally, I have it running pretty well. I got to slow it down around some of my curves because those front wheels are just so sensitive, they'll jump the tracks very easily. There's just no weight on them. The front guide wheels. Anyway, here she comes through the tunnel right now on the second track. Back off the throttle a bit here. This is the area where it keeps losing it, so I'm going to go slow. Well, as I go slow there, it's fine. Not sure exactly why that turn is such a big deal for it. It's a very small turn. Let's try to see if we can switch over to the third track again. Not sure that threw it. Nope, didn't throw it. I'll have to wait until it gets around again. Gonna let this run a little while and get it broken in, so to speak. There we go, now I threw it. So I find, yeah, I have to crawl through this section here. I'm not sure why these front wheels are having that much of a problem with this curve. It's a very slight one, but apparently it just can't handle it. If I go through anything faster than that, it derails. Anyway, let's put her back on the third track and see what that does. Increasing speed slightly. We're going to then go through the back switch points. We'll see if they'll handle those. Fingers crossed. Through the switch. Oh no, not again. I don't know if it's stalled or if it's got a short. Okay, so it very clearly does work, just not very well. Not exactly thrilled with the quality on it, but at least I now know I can get it to run. Let me actually now throw those switches and put it through here one more time. Pardon my reach as I grab my switch points. Yeah, not sure exactly why this thing is so pokey on this. Let's do that one more time. Coming down on the third track again. Through the S-curve where it was stalling before like crazy, now it just flies through. I still can't believe adding weight fixed all of that. But here's living proof of it. There's the stalls there. Yep. Is it off the track or did it just stall? Let's say it just stalled. And it just says a polling pickup. That appears to be the problem. Let's throw number 3 one more time and put him through that one and see what that does. Yeah, pick 3. There it is. Give it a little bit more throttle and it seems to have done the trick. Yeah, it's just that sensitive an engine. It just doesn't like going through certain tracks. And we'll go through the switch points here one last time. That is perfect. Okay, so it looks like that was the main issue. So anyway, I'm going to let this thing run a little bit more, but bottom line, it does run, but not as well as I was hoping. Even with my weird modifications and bodges, which I refuse to display because they are just so sketch. But anyway, at least now I know I can get it working.
Next, of course, we have to discuss the price, which is, well, disgusting. See what I did there? At $249. Now, obviously, you can get that cheaper. I spent about $100 less than that, but it's kind of ridiculous that after all this, and after all the increases in price, this locomotive has all the flaws it had before. Most notably, the extremely primitive axle wiper pickup system for the electric power. This really is what lets this locomotive down, causing it to stall every possible chance it gets. This is further aggravated by the fact that it weighs pretty much nothing, which means when this locomotive stalls, and it will, it pretty much jumps the track almost all of the time. Now, while I was able to get the locomotive to finally run around the track something resembling consistently, it required me to do a little MacGyverish bodging to the unit, including installing, and I will admit this, weights right on top of the circuit board in the tender to make the whole thing work. A new locomotive just shouldn't require that out of the box. Now, I've heard the argument that these are simply toys and should be treated as such. Well, if we take a look at this box right here that this locomotive came in, it clearly is not a toy set up for ages 14 years and up. And at the same time, even if it is a toy, I would expect it to be able to make it around the layout without being pushed. If it were that sort of toy, I would expect it to come with a piece of string attached to the front so it may be pulled around on the track. Unfortunately, this is an electric train, and electric trains should be able to run by themselves regardless of what quality they are. And as for a final conclusion, while I am very glad that Bachmann went back and retooled this locomotive and made it run better, the locomotive still has all the flaws it had before. And while I was able to make the locomotive work with some out-of-the-box bodging and modifications, it's simply not acceptable for a locomotive of this price to come with those sorts of flaws that have to be taken care of by the end user, especially since, again, this is marketed toward beginners. I plan to eventually get hold of a sound-equipped version of this to see if the weight from the sound system makes a difference, but as for this particular model, DCC ready form, at least I can conclude that this is not for beginners. If you're going to buy this, make sure you have some experience on how to modify things, because if not, you're going to be sorely disappointed when it finds every weak point in your layout. And that's going to do it for this review, folks. If you liked it, thumbs up. If not, thumbs down. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and again, keep the metal side down.